building a resilient learning and growth culture within nonprofits that fosters both organizational and individual development. Aakash Sethi, founder and CEO of Quest Alliance, will be moderating this session. I will announce the panelists and then hand over the stage to Aakash. So we have with us Shrashtant Patara, Chief Executive Officer, Development Alternatives; Aalika and Perez, Program Assistant, Ford Foundation; Shalini Menon, Facilitator of Culture Builder; and Kejal Savla, who is the co-founder and CEO at Wisdom Tree. Over to you, Aakash, now.
Okay. So we are I think the purpose of today or this session is to really, I think, talk and unpack what are resilient organizational cultures, and to be able to really make it a conversation as opposed to, PPTs and presentations, and really bring out a lot of the lived experiences that people have here. And I'll start with actually just asking people to introduce themselves, because we didn't really get a chance to really hear about who they are and what they've done, what their journeys have been. And maybe I can start with a little bit about myself. I am Aakash, and I grew up in Ahmedabad as a youth facilitator, as a young college student who was a youth facilitator, and really enjoyed a lot of sort of engagement with young people, and as a process of, discovered myself of who I am, and really helped me understand how to really connect more deeply with young people through the experience of facilitation. So I'm really passionate about that, and that's something I've been practicing over the last 20 years of my own journey. I'll hand it over to anywhere you can start. Maybe Aalika, you can start, and I'll.
Thanks, Aakash. Good evening, everyone. My name is Aalika. I'm originally from Mangalore down south, and I'm born and brought up here in Delhi. So I've always felt like my cross-cultural identity and my living in a nuclear family here, being educated here, but being very rooted in my values from down south, I feel has contributed a lot to my journey. And I studied here, did political science, and then found myself at the Teach for India Fellowship in Mumbai. And as I was doing that, I felt like this was my space to be in the social sector, but I couldn't really pinpoint where exactly. And that's when I actually found myself joining ISDM's first batch in 2017. So I was part of the first batch, and that's actually another way that I'm here today, because it's kind of like all my worlds bring me here together. Post ISDM, I was in the intermediary space for a little bit at a consulting firm for the sector, and now I'm on the funding side at Ford Foundation. So it's really nice to be and have like this little vantage of a little bit of working in the grassroots, and then being at an intermediary, now being on the funder side, because it's very interesting how the whole ecosystem comes together. I'm really excited to meet the co-panelists and everyone else here, because today has been a day of like, this is like the entire sector here today at DoDM. So it's super exciting, and looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you, Aalika. Hi, my name is Shalini, and I'm a former PR agent who trained in mountaineering and entered the social sector 16 years ago. A large part of DoDM 2024 has been around focusing on talent attraction and talent retention. And I was actually relating it to myself. 16 years back when I entered the sector, I really thought it's going to be this short stint that I'll do for fun, and then I'll just go back to capitalism and its ways and things like that. I think the only reason I'm maybe qualified to be sitting here today with all of you is because I'm a believer and a skeptic of org development processes. When the science of organization development fails me, I go to the art of organization development. And when the art fails me, I go to the science of it. And pretty much just by juggling the interplay of these spaces, I've built a career out of it. And I'm really excited about having this conversation with all of you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kejal. I'm currently and always been part of Mumbai. So I think one thing that defines and is most consistent about my life is Bombay. Journey started as a volunteer, and I'm almost like a beneficiary of the sector. So then I had to decide to join the sector because I thought the only way to pay forward what I received being part of some youth programs, part of Blue Ribbon, was to join the sector back. So a lot of last decade of my experience has been being part of the various programs and leading Blue Ribbon movement eventually for the last decade. And in the last about 3 years, I moved on to then start my own organization because I really realized the value of having something called as culture in life, which transforms not just who you are, but also transforms what you do and how you do. So I think that's also one of the exciting reasons to be part of this panel and join this conversation.
Thank you, Aakash. Thank you, panelists, and thank you everyone for being here. Excited to be here. Uh, okay, now we've got the right faces on that. It was really weird because we had 4 different people from the previous session on the monitor there. Um, uh, I think the reason why I'm sitting here is the lived experience of having been in development alternatives for almost 37 years now. Having seen an organization that's been extremely resilient, but at the same time, has also, as an organization, and for us, many of us individuals, lived almost day to day, week to week, with a huge number of challenges and a lot of uncertainty. Otherwise, in these years after graduating as an architect and doing early work in alternate building materials, low cost housing, mud construction, I think what would characterize my experience is just having had a lot of fun across, all the sectors and virtually anything that is to do with sustainable development. And I, looking forward to sharing, some of that today.
Great. So I think the context of this session also is to be able to sort of frame this idea around how do we get to balance or the whole tensions between sometimes organizational mission and sort of individual growth needs, and sometimes they may not always be aligned. So how do we really look at this idea of holding tensions when we talk about resilience? It's not just about that when a challenge comes, we are able to respond to it in a resilient way, but can we also look at resilience as an opportunity for also growth and not just sort of being responsive to some sort of challenges that come, right? So I think at least my sort of understanding of this has also come from this fact of that as we've grown up, there is a certain mental model that we've been given through our education system around these separations that have happened, whether it's the feminine and masculine separation, that oftentimes what is celebrated is this sort of masculine leadership where it's about achievement, it's about going and achieving the targets, setting hard goals. The feminine side, which is around nurturing, which is around being able to be more vulnerable and emotional and express that, oftentimes does not get the sort of importance in our journey. So there is this understanding of leadership that comes from what we see around and what is celebrated, and a lot of it comes from this sort of masculine understanding of it, versus also bringing both sides, because each individual has both sides, but we oftentimes tend to give more importance, or our conditioning has given more importance to that. Similarly, sort of this sort of human nature separation as well, that we've forgotten how to live with nature and be part of nature as opposed to being apart from nature. And sort of we talk about climate change today, some of it I think has come also from sort of this deep separation that we've had from nature, where we've looked at extractive ways of making more money by extracting natural resources from nature, and not necessarily feeling like we can actually be one with nature. And that means sort of changing our paradigm from this command and control and extractive and more greed to something that's more living and emerging systems that we are all a part of. And how do we really embrace the idea of uncertainty, because that's there to stay. And sometimes we forget that that everything cannot be predicted, and that's something that has and nature has a way of sort of showing that to us of late. And finally, I think this sort of inner and outer separation, which is around intuition and opposed to data that's out there, which and the social sort of acceptance saying what is acceptable versus what is my intuition saying, and the rationale and logic sometimes gets more importance than what is inside me as an intuitive individual who wants to bring my intuition also to life. And these separations, I think, over time have sort of created fear or have created a certain kind of disconnection that we experience ourselves as individuals. And sort of what is the sort of sense of reconnection that we need in order to feel more at peace with ourselves first, and then with others around us. So some of it is, I think, one of the framing is around these separations that we feel, and therefore holding tensions and balancing these, that I have these two different sides and I can use both. And like Shalini said, there's an art and science, and can I draw from both sides of myself as well as I think about myself as a living system. In a living system, I need to draw from both these sort of energies that I have. And one of at least my learnings has been around how do we really embrace vulnerability and openness as leaders, to be able to build deep trust and connections with each other, where it's not about always being right. It is also about accepting and creating space for failure and room for saying I failed, I am learning, as a paradigm as well. So yeah, in some of this, at least what I wanted to start with was to frame your definition of a resilient organization or a resilient growth oriented organization. How would you define that for as giving your definition? Maybe you want to start from there this time. So Shrashant, if you can go
Sure.
first, and then we'll go.
2 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I'm conscious that we'd like to keep the conversation flowing, so I'll aim for 2. I think first the disclaimer, as I said at the beginning, development alternatives isn't a resilient organization in the commonly understood definition of what resilience might mean. Because if you looked at it, for example, in terms of financial resilience, then we've never had a benefactor, we've never had a corpus fund. There's absolutely no financial security, and we live month to month, year to year, from what we earn, or the grants that we can generate. If you look at it in terms of resilience or continuity in terms of substantive work, then I think that's where we would probably score much higher, right? And we don't have a definition for organizational resilience, but I think continuity in that on that account, in terms of our substantive commitments, would probably be a significant part of that definition. But I think there are 2 other aspects that we would certainly build into the definition, and one is conformance or belief in certain values. And that's where, from the time Dr. Khosla, our chairperson, set up the organization in 1982-83 to current date, I think we've held steadfast, stayed committed to a belief in those core values, with one huge contradiction. We're not, like that school where those values are repeated or talked about in every morning's assembly, right? And that's what makes it interesting, because right from our founder to everyone in the leadership team that we have now, uh, those values are experienced, they're lived, they're sort of imbibed by people over time, and they're not drilled down or driven into people, right? So I guess that's a happy place for us, and I think it's a great indicator, in terms of uh, how would be resilient. But having said that, or how we define resilience, having said that, just like to point to one of the biggest challenges, which is and you talked about it, uh, and if you look at talent retention in particular, we've had, it takes uh, a fair amount of time, because there is no obvious process. There isn't that much engagement on that account by design, right? We want people to experience it, to sort of learn as they go along and to internalize as they go along. It takes a lot of time, and there is a valley of death, so to speak, where a person, because of other external factors, not having uh, bought in. Uh, Bought in is not really the right way to describe it, but not having sort of felt uh, the kind of commitment to larger mission, goals, our values, leaves the organization. And I just wanted to flag that as one of that. Last few sentences on the vulnerability front. Uh, I Again, we've held this tension. On the one hand, we've been described as one of the most sort of corporatized NGOs, with that very masculine, macho, way of wanting to manage things. And on the other hand, we've been described, it's been observed that we're incredibly soft, almost wimpish in terms of, how we go about managing things. So even at a personal level, I'm not quite sure where we stand on that.
Thank you.
I'll also pick from where I think, Pat, you left. We're talking about resilient growth and resilient and growth both together. And I think it's in itself a very interesting word to have chosen together, because probably at times when we look at resilience, we've been told that we have to be strong, hard, solid, macho, and that's the idea of resilience. Whereas what we're really talking about here, resilience is also allowing for acknowledgement of what's not working. Given the times we are living in, where there's war going on, disasters going on, we can't be expecting people to just show up and be there. Like, acknowledging that these tensions that happen in our external world also affect our internal individuals and our teams and the work that we are doing in the kind of communities we engage with. Some of them go through really hardships. So what does it mean for a culture to acknowledge and allow space inside the organization also to say, hey, while we want to be resilient and continue doing and showing up every day for what we are doing, we also need to acknowledge the mental, emotional challenges and turmoil each of us faces every day. Like, every day when we wake up, we have a few questions going on in our brain that, oh God, like today air quality is bad, but what am I doing about it? Oh God, but I still have to show up and take a class. So these turmoils really do show up and affect each of us individually. And when we are talking about the resilient growth, it also means that at times for me, it may be that we take a few steps back. Maybe there may be a time in an organization when you have to really scale down for a few years so that you can really get your act together. And there's nothing wrong or bad about it. It's part of our growth that at times we take a few steps behind so that we could run faster, so that we could walk again with more stability. So, what does it mean for us to invite this vulnerability in our organizations, in our programs, in our teams, when we engage with our own team members, saying that, hey, maybe the program quality today didn't go well, but what can we learn, and can we allow space for something new to come out of this? Because the times of breakdowns and churns are also the times for breakthroughs and new discoveries. But it comes only when we really allow some space for it. We really take some emptiness, some space, and not wanting to jump to fix it. Like, the world really wants us to sell a product and say, oh, I'll fix your culture, I'll fix this, I'll fix that. So can we take that pause at times, like maybe a few minutes, maybe a few months at times in organizations' cases, so that we can really allow for resilience to come with growth and not resilience to just show the world I'm great, or not just growth or scale at the cost of resilience. And the times where we are living, we really don't know what may happen tomorrow or day after. We're just planning, but can we really embrace the unknown and the known both at the same time and hold it together with gentleness? So I would say that's how we try to engage with organizations. And I think I really believe that part of resilience and growth is a lot of coming together and working together in what we are doing.
Mm, I want to start by acknowledging and honoring the resilience of people first, and then slowly move it to the organization. And the thing about resilient people, how many of you here are also kind of tired of being resilient? I know I am, right? Uh, and the reason why I ask this question is there are a lot of people in communities out in the world who don't have a choice but to be resilient. Women have no other choice but to be resilient. Dalit people don't have a choice but to be resilient. Queer people don't have a choice but to be resilient. Working mothers don't have a choice but to be resilient. Perhaps a lot of men who are impacted by chronic depression and chronic illnesses don't have a choice but to be resilient, because we all are a part of a bigger system where we have to make a living, we have to become part of a certain kind of social structure, so on and so forth. Now, why did I spend the last few seconds talking about individuals and their resilience? Is because if we ask ourselves what is an organization, an organization is a human system, right? And it is a network of human systems. And the reason why it's very important for us to understand some of the dynamics out in the world is because when we set out to build an organization, we bring the same dynamics into the sector, into the organization also. And therefore, a big aspect of building resilient growth cultures is understanding the power differential in the room. Where is power sitting inside the organization? And who's on the decision making table? And who's missing from the room? And I think until and unless an organization and its leaders wear that chashma to constantly be able to look beyond what is most obvious, it's very hard to build anything that is resilient. And then how does one know if the org culture is resilient or not? I would say an organization that is really embracing resilient growth cultures spends as much time celebrating impact and what gets done as much it also spends time asking how we got it done. So it is constantly focusing on that learning process of inquiry. Why is inquiry important? Because that is the only way to change human systems, by inquiring into them. And the process of inquiring is a tough one. It can be really uncomfortable because one has to then do the whole autopsy of the organization and look at the messiness, look at the underbelly of the organization, and ask some very difficult questions. So that's broadly what it is, because it's very easy for us to believe that the indicator of a resilient organization is how resilient are people. People don't have a choice but to be resilient, and therefore what is the infrastructure, what is the engine of an organization to be resilient, to serve the people that it works for?
Thank you. So I think +1 to everything that's been said. But with things like resilience, growth, culture, you can just go on and on talking about it, especially in our sector. But I think when I first heard or even read the term resilience, I remember it was at school, and like it was something about like deserts and cactus growing and how resilient a cactus is, and that's why it grows in places where there's less water and all of that. But I think today, after working at a few organizations, hearing so many people, learning from other people's experiences, interacting with organizations, I think even the word resilience goes beyond mere survival. It's really about thriving. It's about being okay with sometimes, like Kejal said, the unknown. How do you pivot in times of like evolving change, uncertainty, ambiguity, being okay with all of that? And knowing that sometimes it's not about succeeding or failing, it's about also sometimes just embracing challenge and knowing that you will get beyond it. So it's really about holding it all together to tide over a difficult time. And I think every organization has probably had a difficult time, is able to see beyond that. And you don't just want an organization to survive, you do really want it to thrive. And that's where culture, I feel, is a very, very important component. It's important in a family, so back home, it's important even at an organization, because it's that one thing that can bind us all together. And interestingly, culture is, I mean, it can't really entirely be taught, right? There's a part which is nature, there's a part which is nurture. So you have OD consultants who can help you externally, a DEI expert who can probably support you, but there's a lot of internal work that needs to be done. Internal wiring, like when you move from one organization to another, the culture does change. And interestingly as well, when I speak to a lot of peers, and you're like, oh, why did you change from one job to another, one job to another? Yes, you'll hear about the work sometimes, but very often it's terms like the work culture was too toxic, or the culture here is just amazing, I'm really enjoying it. So, why really is this aspect of culture so heart and center in this space that we work in? And on the flip side, in the corporate space, I do hear of like friends in the legal space, in the consulting space, who'll continue to say it's a very toxic culture, but they'll continue to work there. So it's very interesting. The dichotomy is interesting. There's a lot of like unpacking to be done as well, and I think it's both individual resilience as well as organizational resilience that contributes to your ability to have that learning mindset that, you know, we each can cultivate within us as well as contribute to an organization's um, culture building and the whole growth mindset of like learning, reflection, 360-degree feedback. So how do you do that? Open channels of communication, even dealing with challenges, like if there is a reporting of an incident, I mean, of say a sexual harassment incident or something, how does an organization deal with it? Do you brush it under the carpet? Do you, you know, do you have an open conversation with the organization that this is what happened, right? So it's very interesting how there's no set formula for cultivating a resilient growth culture in an organization. There's dynamic ways, interesting ways in which leaders do it and organizations come together to see it. But heart and center, of course, is values, grounding, knowing, you know, your organization's vision and mission, and then realizing that the organization is going to outlast any individual leader, all of your talent put together. So to really build that culture that continues to stay beyond an individual leader's time, or, you know, an individual team member's lifespan. So I think it's really, really important to know that this can, and this is the part that's carried back home, right? You have an unpleasant work culture that you're working in. This is the part you're taking home. It comes out in different ways, but you have like a work experience that gives you a lot of joy, that has enough space for learning, taking individual courses, growth opportunities, initiative. And then that's the positivity, the hope, the learning, the joy that you take back home. So I really think that it's a very important part of all of us, despite us having like different organizations, different journeys. But it's a very like centering thing. And I'm sure when we hear from the audience as well, it will be really exciting to hear of how you would approach this for your individual lives and organizations as well.
Thanks, sir. I think I mean, one thing which at least I face constantly or hear is that, you know, there's so much commitments to meet, so many donor expectations to meet. There is this constant thing of proving that everything is going, you know, really well, and we got to keep that face on at the same time. Sort of this, where is the time to improve? or take that pause, and is that a luxury that we have? And I think this point about sort of holding tensions between these aspects of that, on one hand you have to prove, on the other hand you also have to improve, and how does one create space for both? Because we don't have a choice to necessarily, well, we have a choice, but we don't necessarily have the luxury always, unless, like what Kejal said, that maybe can we have that time to bring a certain pause to sometimes things that are going on, and take cognizance of that, or to recognize that why is something happening the way it is happening, and maybe because the right people are not in the room, the diverse, say, people who are impacted, the diversity is not in the room, and maybe they have answers as well to why something may not be happening in the way, but we perhaps don't include them in the conversation as much as we should, in unpacking why is something happening a certain way. So I mean, there was some conversation we wanted to open out, but because of internet limitations, we are going to go to the next question and then bring you in as well, in terms of what you think about these issues, or if you have conversation or questions that you have. But so today's discussion was also to talk about bridging the expectations of young talent with organizational needs, right? Because there is a mission out there to go and make an impact. There are also young people who have needs in terms of their own growth, aspirations, how quickly they want to, get better salaries or better positions, or better opportunities, better responsibilities, etc. So we wanted to unpack that a little bit through, and this perhaps we can start this conversation in terms of, one is that the world of work is changing, right? And even in the social sector, there is a lot that's changing in the social sector itself. So given that this world of work is changing, how does talent see their relationship with work today? But there are different models out there. There is gig work, and even in the social sector, maybe there are people who are doing 2 3 jobs at the same time, sometimes, or people are fellowship hopping as a way to also get more opportunities to experience different kinds of things that are going on. So while the world of work is changing for young people entering the sector, we still have certain notions of what we as organizations may be holding on to, some of the ideas of that an employee will come, stay for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and build a whole, that's our sort of golden gold standard, right? That if you have retention of people who join, that's what is celebrated more than, say, let's say flexible working, or different kinds of talent coming in at different stages of the journey of an organization. So just want to actually ask this to Kejal and Shalini, in terms of what's your view on how the world of work is changing, and how is how is that affecting the how the talent is seeing their work, and the tension of the organization perhaps not fully meeting that expectation. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think one thing is like right now in the last 3 years, we worked with about 35 organizations and about 4 fellowships. And across these, I think one constant thing young people are demanding is better flexibility, better work culture. And that has been very challenging for the organizations to receive because the work still needs to be done. And in all this context, the competitiveness of the environment we are part of, where we're actually as organizations literally competing other better startups, we are competing the entrepreneur opportunities available for these young people to continue join back, or we're competing with other fellowships who want to have young people experience different organizing, different way of working on the ground. So as an organization, when we're really looking at young talent, I think the expectations have increased. So the acknowledgement that what our new talent is asking of us needs us to relook at how we can design ourselves to look at this audience. And this audience is an important stakeholder also in the conversation. Uh, with the whole boom of entrepreneurship and fellowships increasing, I think young people are really wanting to have newer experiences and they really want the best of the best. There is a constant evaluation going on and in their own minds that, what will really suit me right now. And they really want to live up to that. And experience is a really big part of their life. So if it is not giving them a good experience, it really starts again creating question. And a lot of these influences, of course, come from social media, come from peer pressure. And most young people who may have friends outside sector, they see a very different exposure, a very different reality. So the influences of those different systems that they are plugged into, they affect their own way of perceiving and sense making. What should I really look for myself? A lot of people are leaving our sector because they feel like better opportunities or better competitive advantages are available in other spaces. So I think from a lens of how the world of work is changing, we need to really place ourselves not as better NGO sector organizations vis-a-vis each other, but better work experience at the level of where our country is, almost in competition in some ways with our corporates and startup industry. Um, the other second part I would just like to highlight, and other thing I constantly observe, is a lot of value conflict. Nowadays, when young people are really signing up for work, they're really signing up for what really is coherent with their own internal value systems. What kind of causes and ideologies do they want to sign up with? So, if there is a conflict or a value mismatch, in the next 6 months, they're most likely to leave. So, how can we create again spaces in our own ways where we acknowledge that this is a new way of recognizing that values, ideologies are important part of who a person is when they're joining an organization also.
I think Kejal pretty much has responded to everything. I'll maybe come at it from a different angle, and that is, if you were to ask yourself what are the places where you stayed the longest, you might be able to find certain common patterns there, right? I'm just curious if you could just throw some words at me, like what were the factors that made you stay in a place and not really think about leaving in like 1 year, 2 year, 3 year? Good people, trust, growth, opportunity to do whatever you want as long as it's aligned to the organization's vision. Sure. Okay. Space to learn, more ownership, learning, right? Autonomy, good managers, appraisals, right? Good leadership, right? The interesting thing about is that there is a whole gamut of things, there's an assortment of things that we need to be able to stay in one place, but we only need that one thing to decide to leave, right? And this awareness in an organization's culture is very critical because it just takes that one thing for great talent to decide to exit. That's number one. Number two is, as a sector, we'll have to ask ourselves, what's the big deal about retention? Why retain at all? And a lot of organizations want to retain their talent, but they don't know retain them for what? Just to keep your attritions number low, or because there's been a high ROI in training them, keeping them, all of that. But what is in it for the talent to stay? A lot of times that question remains unanswered. So if an individual is asked to stay, is it a win-win for that individual also? I think that's that second factor that often is missing in these conversations. And the third part is, I often wonder, and like Kejal already spoke about, 16 years back when I entered the social sector, when I was a youngish person, at that point, there was no gig work. So, I just carved my way into the sector and I stayed here. But today, if somebody is starting in this sector, they have that option. They have access to an economy called the gig economy, right? And it's a whole new life. And we can see that young people are creating their own content. They are, their own digital advocates. There's so much that's happening. Uh, and this reality perhaps did not exist a decade ago. So what does it mean for organizations? And very recently, one of my clients is Enable India. They work with people with disabilities, and it came up in the conversation that how we have a job and then we go look for a person for it. Imagine a hiring process which focuses on the person and then go looks for a job for them. So the attention shifts to the supply side, not the job. It's not centered on the job. Now, this might feel very unreal at this point as I speak about it, but my sense is, Gen Z is going to make it happen. I think they're going to shift the way hiring happens, because how hiring happens is going to significantly impact what factors are involved in retention of talent also. And at this point, I must highlight, and this is not a product plug or anything, um, today, a lot of organizations are also teaching us that there are many ways to retain a talent. And I always joke around about this that, Quest Alliance is like a matrix. You can enter, but you can never leave. And why do I say that is, I left Quest Alliance almost 4 or 5 years ago. And if you look at many people, we have more Quest people sitting in this room also, you'll see that there is a big focus on alumni engagement. Often when we talk about alumni, we talk about youth groups, we talk about volunteer groups, fellowship groups, but employees who have left are themselves a big treasure box for an organization. And we continue to come back, as consultants, as experts, as facilitators, as partners, consultants. And I think there are many, many ways to retain talent, and it's not just on the payroll. And I think that if we can, center that question, that if talent retention is not about a person continuing on the payroll, then what are the newer definitions and newer imaginations of retention that we are yet to unpack as a sector?
Thank you. I think that was great to just sort of redefine what retention means as well. Does it mean staying in one organization, or does it mean that you can go beyond just one idea of staying on the payroll? I think that so maybe we should ask sort of that, are we defining retention really narrowly, versus redefining it in today's time, especially because there could be various ways to think about retention, because people take a lot of knowledge with them, and keeping that knowledge and retaining that connection with that knowledge perhaps is as critical as just the individual being on the payroll. So I think that could be a way for us to think about the future, and maybe bringing in Shrashant and Aalika on a question around what are the practices that you have seen or that you have done to retain talent in and or seen in other organizations. That will be great to hear before we also get in any other inputs from the audience.
Sure, thanks.
You
Should
can
I?
go.
Yeah.
Sure.
Before I get to listing what I see as good practices, just wanted to share a few thoughts. One, this big question of what does retention even mean, right? Do we retain, not retain? Are there new ways? It's something that we're experiencing much more, and I think it's a big takeaway for anyone in this room, right? That's something you will have to look at much more actively and manage. So I just thought I'd note that. If I were to wear the CEO's hat, one of the things that we cannot escape, and I should have brought it up earlier, was the need for individuals and organizations to perform. And this big element of performance management, right? Because I think how you do it has a huge amount of bearing on everything from the happiness of people in your organization to the well-being of the organization itself, whether it's growing, whether it's being resilient or not. And again, without for want of time getting into performance management practices in our organization, I just the good, bad, and the ugly of whatever we'd experience. I just wanted to highlight the significance of that aspect.
Yep.
That it's something that has to be addressed. But coming now to good practices that we've experienced or heard of, I think a lot of it boils down to one, the obvious ones, right? The outputs and the outcomes. Are they being dealt with? Are people experiencing success, right? Then you have the financial side of it, the metrics that you set up on that account, and again, whether you're experiencing success. So those are like hygiene factors. But then there are a whole host of others which sort of address the dilemma that I've seen in virtually everyone's mind in the organization, whether they're the youngest staff member or the oldest among us, which is we're good people, we're doing good work, right? Or we're putting so much hard work to do good, right? Then why is it that things are not working out, right? Why aren't we growing? Why aren't we resilient? And growth, of course, there's the whole debate that was happening in the morning on growing yourself as an organization or scaling impact, right? You don't necessarily have to scale yourselves to scale impact, but we'll set that aside. Growth in whichever form it takes. So when we look at that question, I think you have the more subtle sort of factors that come into play as against the hygiene factors. These are more the motivating factors, uh, uh, which basically respond to all the things that people said in the room. Something like learning. So while you may be performing, are you learning, or is the individual learning becomes a question? And on that account, in our organization, because it's not homogeneous across, we've seen that parts of the organization that make commitments to learning do better, they're happier, the people stay longer, etc. So that's one. The second, I think, big factor you could use it as an indicator is how engaging are you internally and externally by way of realizing synergies and partnerships. And that's something that, again, I'd say needs to be kept under the spotlight, actively worked on. Isolation leads to problems. There's a very strong correlation on that account, right? Then I think, and increasingly, this sort of responds to what we've seen emerging in the last 4 or 5 years. Platforms. Do I see myself as part of something bigger than my role? And I'm using platforms as code language for that. So learning platforms, partnerships, these are all things that if delivered upon, if paid attention to, and if delivered upon, make a significant difference, not just in terms of talent retention, but I think in terms of building that resilient growth culture within an organization. Those would be the top 3 or 4 that I'd list.
Thank you.
So, as a funding organization, as a funder, we obviously work with a wide range of partners, and it's very interesting because we work with both the founder-led partners, and then we work with the very professionalized CSOs and nonprofits that have this whole cadre of professional people running the organization, managing the organization. And interestingly, over the past many years, we've been seeing that as we've moved to like unrestricted funding beyond programs, funding for longer durations of time, putting in a component of, comm specialization. If someone needs DEI support, there's an organization that's foreseeing a leadership transition. How do you support them and support them with resources as well as the connects for, say, OD support, talent recruitment support, HR support? How do you resource organizations to build for their own resilience? So these are things that I guess funders traditionally didn't look at, because you only looked at project to project. And it's a problem. It's like a chicken and egg problem, because not every organization as well is able to take this or absorb this. A lot of them are also struggling in terms of capacity, whether it's they're overstretched or they've taken too much on their plate, they've grown too quickly, whatever the nature of their challenges are. Not every organization is able to understand that these resources were given so that you can do what you want to improve your organization. So, a common thing that we've seen with founder led organizations is they don't believe they're human. They think they must work every day, every minute of every day. So you tell them, you look tired, you need a break. How can I take a break? Like, this organization will collapse. So I think it's very important to even understand that even in the social sector, you need the kind of protections, the benefits, self-care, call it what you may. You need those provisions. And how do you ask for those provisions? Very often when you go to certain funders and you ask for those provisions, there are organizations that are told, no, we can't do this, right? Because there's no metrics to measure. Say a leadership member has gone for a 1 week wellness retreat, come back totally refreshed with all of these new ideas. How do you measure for that? So I know there was a parallel session running on like metrics and the usefulness or not, or the credibility of all of that. But I think it's interesting to understand that sometimes investments in yourself pay off in the long run. And that's where the whole culture piece is as well. And hopefully more and more funders, more and more people, both international as well as domestic funders, will realize the importance of investing in the resilience and longevity of an organization beyond just the fiscal year and projects that have to be, all funds need to be expended by X date and whatever it is. But really running off that treadmill, being like, okay, if you're gasping for breath, take a pause. Like, you don't need to continue running, you can take a pause, get back to it. So I think it's very important to have this mindset shift, and that only happens when you have the right allies, supporters, friends. Because a lot of leaders of not profits as well often say that they're isolated, that they're lonely. So who's their peer group? And if you're a woman leader, even more so. So even the DEI piece, it's not just about having, say, organizations having that tick box or women on board, but really, are women part of, is it really an inclusive, equal decision making space, or is it just merely participation and representation of women, or is it really leadership of women, and therein seeing the kind of changes and the kind of impact that, say, a woman leader can have? So I think these are small aspects, and in ways of like even supporting, say, IT, data privacy. How does that build towards the resilience of an organization? Knowledge management. I know Shalini spoke about staying in touch with alumni or previous employees of an organization. They hold very significant knowledge. How do you invest in knowledge management systems for an organization to capture some of those learnings of their times, which probably hold you in good stead? No one wants to reinvent the wheel. So all of these are very important aspects: comms, DEI, OD support, and these are all traditionally not things one funded for. So as we're thinking more about self-care on the personal front, taking those days off, taking time off for families, how do you even do it at the workplace? Setting boundaries, enabling your team to to do whatever they need to help them be more effective at what they need to do as well. So there's many ways of doing it, of course, and I'm sure there's a lot in the room as well, lots of approaches, and hopefully we can all contribute towards this.
Yeah, no, I think the tension between performance and being able to really identify what are development and learning priorities and making space for it. And like also as you were speaking, Alika, I was wondering whether it's a funding issue or it's a sort of self-realization also that that's the sort of balance we are looking to strike, and we will invest in it more, proactively. Like, say one of the things that when we got unrestricted funding as Quest, one of the first things say we did was to say let's invest in community, which is get these 300 people together, because that's something people are sitting on, and let's make time and space for that, because that's what creates the connection and sort of stickiness that is really what people are craving for. So it's the prioritization of where would you also invest. And while performance is important, is community equally important to be able to make people feel good about what they do and celebrate that and create that connection. So opening it up for questions from everyone here. Do you have any thoughts, reflections that you'd like to share? Yes, here, and then the next one. It would be great to hear your name and organization.
शालिनी जी को बहुत धन्यवाद। आप सब लोगों को भी बहुत धन्यवाद। बहुत सारे पॉइंट्स आप लोगों ने बोले हैं, हिंदी में ही बात करूँगा। डॉक्टर दमन आहूजा, सोहम इंडिया, माइंडफुलनेस पे काम कर रहा हूँ, 30 साल से इस सेक्टर में हूँ। मुझे लगता है किसी भी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में जो लोगों के बीच का वार्मथ होता है ना, वो बांध के रखता है। जैसे घर में वार्मथ होता है, सैलरी कम भी हो जाती है फादर की, लेकिन बच्चों के लिए चीज़ें वो लेके आता है। बहुत सारी चीज़ें हमारे डेवलपमेंट सेक्टर में, जैसे डेवलपमेंट ऑल्टरनेटिव से साथी बता रहे थे कि हमेशा फंडिंग का एक चुनौती रहती है। आ जाएगी, महीनों में आएगी, साल भर का प्रोजेक्ट है, उसके बाद क्या। और जब से ये डेवलपमेंट सेक्टर का कॉर्पोरेट्स जैसा हाल हुआ है, तो एक शब्द आ गया है, ले ऑफ। जिस प्रोजेक्ट के फंडिंग बंद हो गई, उसके साथियों को ले ऑफ कर। पहले ऐसा नहीं था। डेवलपमेंट सेक्टर की एक जो स्थिति है वो ये थी, कम पैसे हैं तो मिलके जितना भी है सबके साथ में प्रोजेक्ट्स को। और वो जो उन्होंने बात की शालिनी जी ने, बहुत सारे तरीके हैं। क्वेस्ट अलायंस मान लीजिए प्रयास करता है कि हमारे यहाँ से गया हुआ साथी किसी ना किसी रूप से जुड़ा रहे। तो संस्थाओं के बीच में तो ये वार्मथ यदि है तो सब लोग ह्यूमन बीइंग ही तो हैं। और माइंडफुलनेस में एक चीज आती है, ग्रेटिट्यूड। यदि हम छोटी छोटी चीजों के लिए अपनी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में ग्रेटिट्यूड का भाव सिखाते हैं, संस्कार पिरोते हैं, लोग नहीं जाते। सैलरीज कम हो जाती हैं। और यहाँ पे जितने भी लोग बैठे हुए हैं वो अपनी चॉइस से इस सेक्टर में हैं, बाय फोर्स नहीं है। क्योंकि सफलता के पैमाने जो समाज और परिवार और हमारे सब लोग आसपास के तय करते हैं, उसमें सार्थकता की कहीं ना कहीं चीज की कमी रहती है।
थैंक यू सर,
बहुत धन्यवाद।
Hi, thank you to all the speakers. This was super insightful. My name is Kohinoor. I'm from Pune and I run the Arisa Foundation in Pune. And my question is both a question and a reflection about two things. One, we talk about work cultures, but I do think it's somewhere also rooted in privilege. So I do feel this tension of having a work culture that's great, but also having enough pay that's competitive with the for-profit sector, right? So I would love to know any of your thoughts on this. In terms of, we talk about talent retention as well, right? So in terms of finding the right person, finding the right pay for the right person, keeping the right motivation for the right person with the right pay, and then, having to balance and juggle all of that to then be able to run the organization, meet your goals. And then when we talk about self-care, I feel that also comes from a place of such big privilege that not everyone can afford it. So just, I would love to know your thoughts and any insights you have to share on that. Thank you.
Anyone else has a question before we close and respond to it?
So it's a question and also an observation. When we talk about DEI representation in organizations, uh, and in today's era and time, it is not just about women. It's also about transgender community. It is also about non-binary human beings. So our organization still stuck to that present representation of women and not talking about other people and other genders. I have this question. That's all.
The last one. Sorry, we have to close it. Sorry, Sanjana.
Yeah, thanks, Aakash and panelists for this discussion. Just reflecting on generally, it's very interesting. Most of the panelists and even you are from a civil society or a not-for-profit social enterprise space. And in the last couple of years, we've also seen this phenomena, which is that implementation is not considered to really be the first step or the kind or where people would want to invest in. And a lot of times we talk about being connected. I mean, you talked about power structures, right? And we're having all these conversations, but if you look at a lot of where the bulk of the talent wants to go in the social sector is in where you can control resources, where you can be a consultant, but implementation is not cool. Whereas if you really had to look at power structures, then that position is in fact a very, very powerful position. So I don't know, I mean, just any reflection from any of the panelists, because I thought we could step back a bit and reflect on that, because we're still talking inter-organization, but not sector as a whole.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point, and I think maybe this idea that leadership to be given where those who are most impacted will help the whole sector rather than feeling like people with privilege should always be in the leadership role, but those who are impacted by the issue and by the problem that is being solved, I think we need to see more people in leadership roles, maybe in and that's what I'm also sort of taking away. But I'll open it up for others to sort of reflect on the questions that are being asked and close with that. So I don't know if people want to take specific questions. Shalini, do you want to take the DEI one to begin with, and maybe the self-care and privilege one? Okay. So you can start with the DEI, then we can go around others.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a response to what you're saying, Sheena. The only response is that we need to just acknowledge it, and this comes back to the part that you're also speaking about, how depending on where the funding is flowing, those organizations get to attract a certain kind of talent and therefore consolidate certain kind of power. All of that, for me, both of your inputs are very connected. And that is because organizations will always mirror the world that we are part of. They are not, oasis by themselves. So the problems of the world will get replicated inside an organization also. And which is why I also speak of power differential, because if power differential exists in the world, we will bring it despite great intentions, despite a strong theory of change. We're going to bring it inside the organization also. So I have no response other than actually acknowledging, yes, it happens, it exists, but I see it with a lot of kindness and compassion for leaders who are building organizations, because if we chase the goal that organizations will become a crisis-free, conflict-free, error-free zones, we will never succeed. Resilience is despite the conflict, tensions, stresses, failures, not the absence of them. So even if we replicate the problems of the world inside, it doesn't mean we shut shop and go home. I think it just is a reminder of how fragile we are in our existence. I mean, I don't have any other response to it.
Yeah. So holding tensions, keeping fragility as part of it, and not only saying that we have to strive for sort of this utopia that doesn't exist. And it's sort of,
we will make mistakes.
yeah, and it's okay to be fragile as well. In that sense. Aalika, do you want to
So
say?
two quick comments. So I think on your comment, totally agreed. And I may have only mentioned women, but of course we must go beyond that because that is the world we live in today. And all voices must be represented, given due acknowledgement, and be brought to the table, right? So totally accept. And my apologies there in case I missed mentioning that. I'm a huge believer and supporter and advocate of what you just mentioned as well. On the self-care point, when I say self-care, I know there's always notions, perception. It doesn't mean a mani-pedi. Self-care can look different to each individual. How do you individualize it for yourself? So just to give you two quick examples, I was recently in Ranchi with some of our programs. We were doing like a monitoring visit, meeting them, speaking with women leaders, Mahila mates working on the NREGA program. And while speaking with them, I said, what does self-care look like to you? And one lady responded, कि Sundays को मैं खाना नहीं बनाती हूँ, मेरे बच्चे बनाते हैं. That is self-care for her. That's one day when her tea is brought to her in the morning. She gets a couple of minutes or 1 extra hour to sleep. That's self-care for her. There was another woman leader who's more like city-based, and I was speaking with her. And I said, what does self-care look like to you? And she says, I'm always the one at home and I work from home. Everyone in my house is working. I'm always the one answering the doorbell. So on the weekends, I decide I am going to be the last one who gets up. Why should it always be me? That's one of the ways she, takes care of herself. So I feel like even self-care, I mean, we need to widen like our horizon of what it can look for each person. And if you're not getting it because of whatever reason, you need to demand for it. Persist, continue to ask for it, because if we're talking about resilient growth culture for organizations, we also need to build for our own resilience. So if it means taking time off, having a quiet moment, going to bed early, whatever it is, it could look different to different people, and acknowledging that, but what do you need? And advocating for it, demanding it from your closest people, whether it's family, organization, friends. So that's just one comment. We don't need to get stuck up on like certain things that are, symbolic of self-care traditionally, but I think widening that self-care could look different for different people.
Awesome. Shrashant, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, if you have a minute, three very, very quick points because of what's emerged in the discussion and your question. Privilege. It's an area where, quite honestly, I feel disappointed at times. Sometimes even upset, and try to do my best to remind colleagues of how privileged they are. When I go out for recruitment, and most particularly management schools, ISDM, some of you are here. I think people need to be reminded, or we need to understand what's their understanding of the world they live in, right? So I ask them, whether a civil society or a social sector salary would place them in the bottom 10%, because you're comparing it to corporate salaries, or would it place them in the top 0.5% of the Indian workforce, right? Because the answer to this question is crucial to us, right? If you understand that with a salary, with a development alternative salary, you will be in the top 0.5%, right? Then at least we're reassured that that's the world around you, right? It's not your college mates who might be. So that's one. We have to make people more aware of how privileged they are and the sense of responsibility that comes with that. Point number two, we talked about a whole host of aspects, so many dimensions that need to be taken care of. At the end of the day, if we're talking about managing our own organizations, we need to place our bets, right? So if I, for example, had a limited amount, and we do have a limited amount of time and money at our disposal to look at how we would build a more resilient growth culture, I would place ownership, right, or inculcating, nurturing ownership at the center of the 2 or 3 things that we'd be able to do. Because I think it's also an indicator of sorts, difficult to measure, but that's something around which a lot of what we talked about hinges. Am I working for someone else, or am I an owner in this organization? Right? Being just one example. The third, again, we're totally running out of time. I would have liked to touch upon it a little bit more, which is, when we talk about resilience, it's natural for us to seek help as individuals, organizations. I need help to make myself more resilient, right? And therefore, I look for collaboration, I look for partnerships, platforms. But when I talk about growth, I talk about myself and my organization, right? And there's such a dichotomy here. So I think the sooner we learn as organizations that growth, particularly in our sector, will also come from, engaging with others, partners with others, you'll get over this, sort of dichotomy, but you'll also become a more resilient growth, driven organization. Thanks.
I think acknowledging, and the panelists have already said, I'll just say how I make sense of it, that we are living in a world where the traditional value system, the modern and the postmodern, all are coexisting together. So all the questions that we are asking and trying to ask are very important for us to also find new answers and new ways of organizing ourselves, not just in our organization, but also in our sector. And also, like the last part I felt you were mentioning about our sector, the reason we're talking about organizations is also because we feel organizations build ecosystem and ecosystems build the sector. And for us to take this start from individual to org is an important piece. And just the last point, I think, to build resilient organizations, one of the learnings we've definitely had is how can we expand our circle of care? Like at times as project people, we want to just focus on project. Can we think of our team? If we're thinking of team, can we start thinking of our verticals? And if we're thinking of verticals, can we think of the org? And if we think of the org as org leaders, can we think of the ecosystem? I think the moment we switch one level, expand one more level of our care, like our questions and our solutions both start being very different.
Awesome. I don't think I need to summarize that because I think there's a lot of wisdom that was there in the room. So thank you for sitting through it, and happy to talk offline on this conversation. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you so much. From personal experiences from town hall, I know discussion on culture cannot be wrapped in 1 hour, definitely. Thank you so much for that. May I request the team to felicitate the panelists with the small token of gift and succeeded by a photo.